that I want to look at. Okay, I'm now recording. So let me share my screen and pull up the note I have on emotional intelligence. Oh no. Okay, emotional intelligence, the concept was popularized by Daniel Goleman. He's not the one who created the concept, but his book of the same name popularized the concept. And he describes it as a range of abilities, self-awareness, emotional self-management, empathy, and social skills. And then he noted that women tend to be better than men. Or I would stop here to just emphasize that emotional intelligence is like intelligence available to everyone. It's not male or female. It's an intelligence. And so we all have some measure of emotional intelligence. But Goleman did say that women tend to be better than men on average at empathy, which is one of the range of abilities of emotional intelligence, particularly emotional empathy, sensing in the moment how the other person is feeling, and also at social skills, at keeping things feeling good between people in a group. Men, on the other hand, he said, tend to be better on average at self-confidence, particularly in groups, and at managing distressing emotions. Welcome, Andrew. Sorry to have had you out so long. We've just started to look at emotional intelligence, quickly reviewing the work of Goleman. So he identifies 5 competencies of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And that, of course, is very brief, but it gets to the essence of what is emotional intelligence. Having said that, I would just like to invite you to comment on what you anticipate might be the relationship between emotional intelligence and servant leadership, given what we know about the characteristics of servant leadership. Or maybe you have a question to raise on emotional intelligence.
When I think about the relationship between emotional intelligence and servant leadership, I think one perspective I have in this is like within community development. So often when people have gone into communities to try to help create change, they've done so from a relief mentality, right? So going in and taking systemic issues and treating them like emergencies, because they're not taking the time to actually get to know the people there, helping guide those people so that they can uncover the actual issues that are at hand. And so they go in and they pinpoint what they think are problems. And I think the same happens within leadership, that if we don't take the time to be emotionally aware, have emotional intelligence regarding who we are, what we're experiencing, who the people we're leading are, and what they're experiencing, we're not serving them. We're actually still in that strictly managerial role, or dictatorship role, where we're leading from a hierarchical standpoint. This is, I'm not caring about who you are and what your experience is. So I think it's a crucial piece for servant leadership.
Thank you. That's well put. And it's certainly, given the nature of servant leadership, um, the desire to serve others assumes that we are going to take the time to understand and know others before we jump into, as it were, help. And it certainly challenges us in terms of our self-awareness, in terms of motivation. What I think that is a big piece. What is really motivating us to serve? Because there are all kinds of reasons why people serve, and they're all not necessarily because of our interest in the other. We can serve, and oftentimes we do serve out of our own self-interest. And that isn't necessarily good or bad if we look at service pragmatically in terms of the end result that we would like to accomplish. However, we always have to be aware that in our serving, we do not want to trample on or impede the progress of others. But I think one of the key components of servant leadership is the desire to help others become better, to become their better self. And if that is what is motivating us, then certainly we are going to be prepared to take the time to know others. And it does take time to know others, especially when the other is in a completely different environment from the one we're accustomed to being. So that is always a challenge to us in terms of leadership. And I would say, especially to us in terms of Christian ministry, that is an ongoing challenge. Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else would like to comment on this very brief reminder of what is emotional intelligence as we seek to apply it to servant leadership? Or if you have a question or observation.
Well, I think empathy, it's always very huge as far as servant leadership is concerned, and that's, yeah, it's quite instructive, especially now, you know, that's pointed out here that emotional empathy is that women express that much better than others, because servant leadership, as we've seen in all, you know, the stories and the surveys, had to do with making sure that the followers feel comfortable around the leader, because the leader can feel, you know, because empathy is basically being able to walk in somebody's shoe, like they say, being able to walk in somebody's shoes for at least a mile and feel how it feels. Then you'll be able to have a better treatment for the person. So I absolutely agree about, you know, the study here, or, you know, the reference there, that women express emotional empathy better than men.
And that is not necessarily saying that men are less empathetic, or maybe less have less emotional intelligence. Much of that comes from the way we have been socialized in terms of men and women. We have been socialized so that women are allowed to be sensitive to and expressive in terms of their connectedness to others. Women nurture, that is a natural tendency, but it doesn't mean that men are any less nurturing. It just reflects the fact that our society does not encourage men to be as nurturing as women are. But men are just as nurturing as women and can be as emotionally intelligent as women are. But there are social constraints to that development that is reflected in the difference between men and women in this area. I just wanted to make that clear. Anybody else would like to comment, question that? Just a brief reference to emotional intelligence and servant leadership. Of course, and I am curious, and I'm going to look for the research that has been done that has sought to link emotional intelligence with servant leadership. I know there's research out there on that, and I'm curious to look and see what they have found. Any other comment, question on that? If not, I am just going. Sorry.
One last thing is I was just thinking about, even with the intention to do right by others, I think part of the practice of emotional intelligence is an intentional slowing down to really think through how, just what someone is going through. And so I've myself and other leaders I've known have gone into situations to try to serve with good intentions, but we didn't practice good emotional intelligence, especially when you're working cross-culturally, or it's easy to make assumptions about what you feel like is going to serve somebody. And so I think that's where emotional intelligence plays in, where emotional intelligence can be just a great trigger to say, I'm going to start asking questions because I don't want to pretend to fully understand this person and where they're coming from. I'm going to get to know this person and take the time to know them, so that as I serve them, I actually serve them.
Thank you. And you said a phrase there, take the time to know them, because there is no one time frame that we could use or identify and say it will take us X amount of time to get to know. And coming from our American perspective, that where we value time and we put a lot of emphasis on time, and we must manage time and we must complete the project within a certain time, that becomes quite a challenge. Thank you, Andrew.
A good example is a few years ago when we had our first child. I spent a whole day doing all these chores and tasks that I thought would make my wife really happy, because I was trying to serve her, and I was going, I'm going to do this and do that. And then she was upset because she goes, you didn't do it. You weren't serving me. You were serving yourself. That's what you wanted to do. I go, I know, but I was doing it for you. She goes, yeah, but that's not what I wanted.
Interesting.
And I didn't take the time to slow down and go, what would actually serve her? Let me talk to her about it. Let me think through her lens of what's serving to her, not what's serving to me. Because they were all tasks that made me feel accomplished and made me feel good, but she wasn't, she was fine with them, but it didn't serve her the way I was hoping it would.
Thank you. That's a good example. Thank you for sharing that with us. Anybody else?
Yeah. So as we talk about knowing the person, I think a good starting point is knowing the culture, knowing about how certain cultures interact, power distance. Some cultures like to be close to you that might invade your personal space.
Yes.
While other cultures, they don't like to shake hands or do other things. I got an example. You made me think about one, Andrew, is we were meeting, I was deployed, we were meeting with one of the tribal leaders, and he was 2.5 hours, 3 hours late. So that just goes back to the reference to time, where, for them, time is not really relevant. They just showed up whenever, I guess, they felt like it. So that's just another example where it's just a cultural difference.
Certainly. Thank you. Like I said earlier, looking at emotional intelligence, at this point in time, when I do this course again, I think I'm going to put in a piece where we spend more time are looking at the relationship between emotional intelligence and servant leadership. So I'm going to step out of this and I'm going to look at your group discussion. I've given you some feedback on it, but I think before I discuss the feedback, I just want to briefly present to you a summary statement on the tenets of servant leadership. So let me just come out of this. Okay, bear with me. And this one is a very brief presentation to remind us of our servant leadership tenets. The objective of this brief presentation is to look at a definition of servant leadership, name the 11 characteristics of servant leadership, determine whether the characteristics are incorporated into each leader's style, and then foster the use of style in everyday practice. We're not necessarily going to work through all of that, but servant leadership as calling. Let me do it as a slideshow. Okay. The servant leadership is rooted in the belief that the leader senses a calling to serve others. Servant leadership has deep roots and is value-based, and the desire is to impact others. So there is a high level of selflessness in terms of the goal of the servant leader. The desire is not to benefit self, but to impact others. And so there's a willingness to sacrifice self-interest. So one of the skills of a good leader, of any leader, but especially so in terms of servant leadership, is listening. Excellent listening skill, interested in the views of others, skills that can be learned. So these are not necessarily, sometimes we think of skills in terms of what is innate and what is learned, but the skill of listening can be learned. And if you are truly committed to leadership, any leader, one of the skills that you have to be aware of and develop is the skill of listening. Empathy. We've talked a lot about empathy just now. Can walk in others' shoes, understand others' problems, perceived as being understanding, skill that is easier for some people than for others. We all have a sense of empathy, and our level of empathy reflects how much we practice it. It's like the skill of listening. We all are able to listen and want to listen, but that is a skill that you have to practice. You have to be aware of what level you have there, and you have to be willing to practice that skill. And of course, I think leadership in any context does challenge us in the area of both our listening and our empathy. Healing. Others want to approach this leader when something happens. A person who is truly a servant leadership tends to draw people to himself or herself because they have good listening skills and they practice empathy. They have a concern for the emotional and health and spirit of others. In the context of Christian ministry, we would say that they have a concern for both people's spiritual development, spiritual health, and their emotional health. And in the context of Christian ministry, we tend to merge the two. The ability to create an environment that encourages emotional mending. So important. Awareness. There's a keen sense of what is happening around them. Constantly searching for cues. Not easily fooled. Persuasion. Stop me at any time if you feel I'm going over this because I'm assuming we know it already, but I'm using it as a gateway into our discussion on the group project. The ability to convince others to do things rather than to rely on formal authority. The ability to offer compelling reasons. And the servant leader never forces others to do things, but allow them to draw their own conclusions.
I have a question about persuasion.
Yes.
Just within power dynamics and power differentials, and if this isn't the appropriate time to ask it, that's fine. But just when I think of persuasion, and this is something I studied in my undergraduate a little bit, I think now I think about a power differential that, you know, a leader might have. The people might feel an obligation to say yes to their ideas, even if they disagree. How does that factor in with persuasion of just the servant leader being mindful of that?
In terms of any leadership style, persuasion and the ability to persuade others is important. I would say, however, that from the perspective of a servant leader, our persuasive style would be one that engages others so that we don't seek to dominate. We want to spend time to have others understand the vision, buy into the vision. We're going to, yes, there's going to be persuasion, but it's not going to be as a persuasive style that ignores people's feelings, that bypasses people's feelings. Rather, I would think that it would be a persuasive style that allows others the freedom to ask questions and to disagree as they seek to come into an understanding of the vision that they need to support. That is how I would identify persuasion in the context of a servant leader. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Question, comment on that? Conceptualization encourages others to dream. As leaders, we are dreamers. We have big dreams. But dreaming is not unique to leaders. The people around you have dreams too. And a smart leader, a servant leader, would recognize that other people have dreams and would give people room to encourage and build their dream within the vision that you have. That's big. But a true servant leader encourages others to dream, encourages others to think big, foresight. That's a big piece, the ability to anticipate the future and to anticipate consequences. Be adept at picking up patterns. Sorry, stewardship. I'm aware that I'm moving through a little fast on this, but I'm going to put it into the course. But I want to use it as a gateway to looking at your group projects. Desire to make a positive difference for the future. Desire to prepare an organization for its destiny. And this characteristic that is key to servant leadership. Okay. Growth. a strong sense and desire to help people grow, to serve people so that they become their best self, so that they accomplish. So growth is inherent in serving and in servant leadership. The desire to meet others' need to grow spiritually, personally, and professionally. A holistic understanding and a holistic approach to growth. Building community. Belief in an organization functioning as a community. Interest in instilling spirit in the workplace. Learnable characteristics. Listening, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, and foresight. These are not necessarily characteristics that we're born with, or even if we're born with them, we still have to develop them. Growth and building community. There's some characteristics that are difficult to learn. Calling, empathy, and stewardship. Calling is internal. We can't force people into calling. You have to know whether or not you're called to serve in the position in which you are. And that, from a Christian ministry perspective, I think we all understand that. The issue is, how do we manifest that sense of calling? But the good thing about a sense of calling is that in times of challenge, it is that which keeps us going in positions of leadership. Empathy and stewardship are two other characteristics that are difficult to learn, and so is healing. Okay. Why bother? And we'll stop here because this PowerPoint came from the context of nursing, but I thought, as I said, I'll just remind us of it as I take us to your presentation on the group project and give you some feedback on that. So I'll just do a new share as I'm going to pull up your presentation. Okay, let me come out of this and show. Okay, I'll come out of this. I hope this doesn't knock me out. Okay, let me go to your, yes, this is it, your presentation. Okay, were there any questions? I know I did say to you I didn't want to interfere with the process of your doing this case study, but were there any pressing questions that you had in terms of this case study? Any pressing questions that you had? Okay, so I'll just pull up the sections where I've made comments. The question 2, the identified gaps. When I looked at what you did here, what I recommend is, first of all, to identify the tenets that you are covering and then state the gap. I'm going to send this back to you with the comments. So that part, the gap part there, needs some more work. You did identify, which is good, the tenets of servant leadership that you wanted to address in the case study, and it was persuasion, foresight, conceptualization, and building the community. that's fine. So now when you go to the gap now, what I expected is that you would take these same 4 tenets, identify them, for example, persuasion, and then identify the gap that you saw in the area of persuasion in the case study. Foresight, you do the same. So that's why I said identify the tenet first, then state the gap. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to be clear so that you will know what to do to revise it. So the solution to improve the tenet, you did that here. You identify the tenet and then you stated what the solution would needs to be. Now, I highlight this one in terms of building community. You said this can, oh, I stepped out of it. You said this can be done by finding ways to engage employees and spending time with them during breaks or lunch. This could also mean moving offices to be more accessible as it demonstrates employee importance and value. Now, in terms of building community, that for me, I was just thinking in the context of the case that we're looking at. That is just a beginning. I would like to see you go deeper in terms of the need for building, and in this case, because of this this case study, it seems to me that we're not just talking about building community, but I see it as a rebuilding of community here, because this organization has gone through a process that, if you recall, it was begun when they lost 20% of their financial funding. And that had a devastating impact on the organization. So the building community here piece, I think, is one of the major challenges that this organization has. And I wanted to see you go deeper in this area. Questions, comment on my observation? Anything you would like to have me clarify before I move on? Okay. The measure, how would you measure success for each solution? I would take the same approach. The tenet, the solution, and then the measure. I would do a grid like that so that we could see the comparison. In this one, let me just move this aside. You said the measure of persuasion will be the degrees of resistance. Check the employee's morale and acceptance by meeting with them and discussing their view on leadership. And then I just say here, state the solution, then state the measure. Now, I have a question here about what you can really accomplish if you met with people and discuss their view of leadership. How do we do that? Do you think people will be open to, if you met with them face to face? Remember, you're talking about leaders meeting with the whole group. Do you really think that people will tell you what they really feel in that environment?
Well, you're right. From my experiences, most employees are reluctant to speak the truth, for lack of a better term, in front of leadership. Mm-hmm. So I think further on through the presentation, we had discussed something where they could provide anonymous feedback.
Okay, and so that's what I wanted you to be able to say and to identify in terms of your strategy. That the strategy that you would use, especially looking at the organizational case study that we have before us, you would have to build into that strategy some measure of anonymity or confidentiality so that people will feel free to really tell you what they think about leadership and what has happened in the organization. That will be important. Anybody else on that, or if Brian wants to extend on that?
I'll just say that I think from my experience, even that anonymity not sure what that was, sorry.
Okay.
It's not here, I don't think, but we're dealing with a largely Asian culture, and they are very game-based and honor-based, and
yes,
they have an incredible respect, at least on the surface, for authority.
Yes.
While they may completely privately denounce them, they do not feel very free to voice anything negative against authority.
Right.
And so it could be our best shot at getting their real responses, but it doesn't come without its own set of challenges culturally.
Thank you. And I would like to see you state all of that you've just said. Because the culture does have a role to play in terms of the solution that you would like to offer. Now, I would suggest, therefore, that you would have to put yourself in the place of the people in that culture in order to come up with a solution that would be realistic and beneficial to the leadership that is working with that cultural group. So that is a challenge, but that's the approach I want to see you take in this. So when you talk about the measure of each solution, it's the same thing that I said earlier on. Identify the tenet, identify the solution that you're proposing, and then identify what would be that measure of success that you would be looking for. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, right. I think that's
Yes.
Yeah, that's it in terms of my feedback. So I'm giving you an opportunity. I'll send this to everybody, the same document with the comments that I've made, and give you an opportunity to refine it some more for me before I look at it to give it a grade. Does that make sense? Okay.
It does. When do you need it back by?
You could. I will give you next week end, not this week. Next week. So I'm giving you time to work at it. Okay?
Right.
Okay. Question, comment? Earlier, just to clarify, book report 3, it's supposed to be servant first, but if you don't have a copy of it, I would allow you to do another book. Because in fairness to you, I've been on Amazon and I see it's a very hard book to get, and I see the ridiculous prices that some people, I think one time I saw $600 somewhere. I think I did. And I thought, no. I don't think so. Yeah, somebody's trying to get rich. Okay, so if you don't have that, feel free to use another book from the required or recommended reading list. Okay, just let me know what it is. But give me a heads up. but that's what. But the book number 4, I have Focus on Leadership. Do you have that one?
Yes.
Focus on Leadership. I think it's an excellent piece, and so that would be the last one, and you'll hand that in at the end of the course. Okay, so that that covers it. Any question? I want to review with you the requirements for the final assignment. So let me go in and pull up the okay. I'll pull up this syllabus. So let me see. I think it would be easier for me to pull it up from within the course. So I'll keep you on share and go into the course. Let me see. Let me exit this. But let me see, servant leadership. Let me see. I have different, I tend to not throw away anything, but then that sometimes can put you in trouble. Let me make sure I pull up the right version of the course syllabus. Okay, no, I hate when this is, I want to pull this over here.
Page 6.
No, I don't think I want that one. I'm going to come out of this one. Let me come out of this one. Seven, 728. 728. Okay, this is the right one. Okay, I'll scroll down to the instruction on the course syllabus, on the major assignment. Okay, the individual project. You're to write at least 20 pages assessing your journey on becoming a servant leader and your plan for growth in this area. Discuss how heroes, hard times, high time, heritage, and the hand of God have shaped you as a servant leader. Discuss how your natural gifts either provide natural abilities or limits your growth. Discuss what lack of past experience and areas in your character will be the next challenges for you in growing as a servant leader, as well as specific plans you have over the next 2 years to grow in these specified areas. Growth plans can include both focus areas during your course of study here at BGU, proactive selection of mentors, counselors, or accountability communities, or initiating projects to gain new experience. Identify the gaps, the challenges you face as you integrate servant leadership principles in your sphere of influence. Questions, comments about those directions for your paper, for your major paper? Does that mean the directions are clear enough so you don't have any questions? And that's fine. It should be clear, but I just want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions for clarification, etc.
I have one question. I don't see it there, but I saw it somewhere in my syllabus on the individual project, and maybe I'm skipping it on your screen, but it says you will have demonstrated that you accessed and utilized BGU's online library.
Yes.
And popular. And my question is, what kinds of things would qualify to demonstrate that?
Well, the literature that we expect you to reference literature as you describe your journey.
Okay.
So it's the literature that you would reference, that you would have looked at using the online library. And certainly you should be able to use the literature that we've identified to you in terms of both the recommended reading list and the required reading list and the journal articles. And those are, you could find them within the library.
Okay, I got it.
That's a good question, Bill. Yes.
Just any quotes that we use citing from the online library. Obviously, that's a little bit different than if it were in a hard copy book. And so it just shows that we are familiar with how to do that. Is that what you're looking for there?
No, I wouldn't say that you couldn't use your hard copy. No, certainly not. The first thing I would go to is my hard copy, whatever I have. So I don't want you to feel that we are forcing you to do something when you have the hard copy.
Okay.
But the journal articles that we have listed, okay, most of them, if not all of them, you should be able to find them through the online library.
Okay, I got it.
So that would be good enough evidence. Good question.
Thank you.
Any other question, comment in terms of this? Any other? Okay, well, I'm glad it's that clear. And before we go, I just wanted to just take us ahead. So in the last week of the class, I'm going to ask each of you to do a PowerPoint presentation of the key findings of your project in the last week, week 9. Week 7 and 8, week 7, we expect you would be writing the individual project. And I recommend that as you write your individual project, look at the rubric that we're going to use to grade that, to help you along the way. So week 7, I will schedule a Zoom meeting. I will be in my Zoom room. If you have any question, you're free to come in and ask. So I'll set up a Zoom meeting for you to come in to ask any questions on the project. And the same thing with week 8. I will not necessarily do a formal lecture presentation, but I'll be there available if you have any questions or concerns that we could address. Is that clear to you?
Very helpful.
Okay. Now, there's just one other thing I want to comment on. I have a question for you in terms of the online discussions we've had so far. I've noticed that I don't get any comment from you when I put in my 2 pennies worth. And I just wondered, is it that you feel that you don't have to comment to the professor, that my own just stands out there unanswered?
Yes.
That's probably some truth to that. I read them all, but I was like, well, should I respond? Should I not respond? Are you closing out the discussion? So,
well, I do expect a response. I'm accustomed to getting a response. So I was just wondering if it is that the class doesn't respond to the professor. So I'm saying, please feel free to respond to the professor, because the professor feels very lost.
Okay.
I may have hit the heart or the like a couple of times, but that was about it.
Okay, so I just wanted to raise that. But I've enjoyed the discussions, and you've been pretty thorough. I've graded last week's discussion and I've sent it to you. So I hope you've looked at it. Okay?
Yeah.
Good. Any other question, comment before we close off?
Okay, are we likely to get because what you said for weeks, is it week 7 or week 8 when we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation on, is it about like a sketch of what we're going to be doing for our individual project that we're expecting?
So what you will do, usually what I ask students to do in that presentation, by then I would hope you would have had a complete outline of your major paper. And so I would like to recommend that in PowerPoint format, you share with us the major issues that you've covered, the findings that you've covered in terms of your own servant leadership journey.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay. And I would say, I usually like to put a number on the frames of the PowerPoint because I don't want you to get too carried away, because this is a big paper. And I would say you should be comfortable with a presentation of between 12 to 15 slides. Okay. Because remember, the paper itself is 20 pages. If you were to break that down into PowerPoint, that could be pretty long. So I would just limit you to between 12 to 15 pages. And I always ask people when you do a PowerPoint to identify your sources. So one of those 12 to 15 pages would be the sources that you've used. Okay?
All right. Thank you.
And you can be as creative as you want to in the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
other question, comment? Well, thank you for joining us. And next week, as I said, I'll just schedule a Zoom room and you can come into it between 1 and 2 if you have any question, concern, etc. Okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Have a good week,
Yeah, thank you.
everybody.
All right, you too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Blessings.
You too.
I'll end the meeting now.
All right.